boom, I think I'm going to begin the recording. Woo! And remember, so yeah, it's Thursday, and we're going to jump straight into Rhino. I do want to just make sure that nobody has any big questions. Any little questions? Yeah.
What lo-fi channel do you use?
It is Lo-Fi Vibes. Yes. I'm kind of a fan of background music, and I used to listen to lots of like really aggressive like popular music, like the kind stuff like radio music. But when I was in graduate school, I got really into listening to ambient music because I just like to have it on while I work. I'm a multitasker. So, all right, well, let's jump into this boat. There are definitely a few things that I want to do to this boat. I have a little bit of a plan, not too much of a plan. But I do want to kind of just maybe frame how we got here. And one of the ways that might be interesting to see how we got here is I'm actually going to go to use this select menu. So there's a select objects menu in Rhino that can be pretty useful. I'm going to select all the surfaces that are in my Rhino model right now. So if I go to select, edit, select objects, and then surfaces, I can select all of those surfaces. And I'm just going to delete them for a moment so that I can show you how we kind of got started with this form, which was we made a form to one line to sort of describe the bottom sort of profile. Then we made one side beam to sort of describe the half of the top. And then we also made this kind of back piece right here. And we used the edge curves method under the surface menu to kind of create most of these surfaces. I think in the back we also used the planar curves method because those curves are indeed planar. So kind of continuing from here, there's a couple of things that I still would like to do to the boat. And one of the things that I would like to do to the boat is I would like to take it from the world in which it is a collection of surfaces, and I'd like to make it a solid thing that has weight and mass. Just to kind of recap, I know we discussed this on Tuesday, surfaces in Rhino have no dimension. They're literally the description of a surface with no dimension. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they show up on the screen and they block light. But if we were to 3D print this with maybe an unforgiving 3D print software package, guess what we would get? Literally nothing. Because according to the 3D printer, there's nothing here. And if you zoom in on these surfaces, they just maintain that sort of like linear existence, right, where they have no thickness. So what I'm going to do to make this shape a solid is I'm going to do kind of a two-step process. I'm going to go ahead and fill in the top. So right now the top, it looks like it's three curves that are describing the top. There's this one, not that one. Actually it's just this one right now because we did it in halves. And then there would be this one, and this one is sort of describing the top. Now, funny thing about curves, we all can see that these curves generated this surface, right? We used these curves to generate the surface. Over here, because we mirrored it over, we did half and we mirrored it over, these don't have the curves that we created the surface with. That's not really a problem because when you're in all of the surface construction methods or the solid construction methods, it will allow you to select surface edges as curves. So no big deal. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and go to planar curves. What does it mean that they're planar? Well, here you can see that if I select them, I'll go ahead and just start selecting what I need to. So that includes this surface edge, and then this curve and this curve. Okay? When I select those, you can see that from even 2 views that they're totally flat and planar to each other. So they're all existing on the same plane. Yes? Yeah, that's a great question. So if I wanted to go back to the pre-mirrored version of the boat, I would basically just have to delete these surfaces that I created by mirroring. Well, I'm not really sure if I understand what you're asking. That's okay. So the mirroring isn't like a continuous process. It's like something that you do, and it just creates geometry, and then the surfaces and curves they're there, and they're just like everything else, basically. So you can undo it. I mean, you undo it. You can delete the pieces, but it's not smart enough to sort of like let you go back in time to, like, there's no history brush or anything like that in Rhino. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so now that we are sort of like, yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're committed to this mirroring, although right now, because it's sort of part of our construction process. But I could see for sure, it does kind of beg the question of like, oh, well, what if I wanted to change this part? Do I then have to, it's not linked to this part in any way. So you'd have to change both, yeah. So from here, we're going to, since we have these planar curves, we're in the middle of a planar surface creation operation. So I'm just going to hit enter and let it do it. And now you can see that the boat is, the boat is very much looking like a closed polysurface now. Now, it's not exactly what we want. I mean, how are you going to get in that boat? I don't know. You're not, right? So we're going to do a couple more steps to kind of get it where we want it to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything and go to the solid menu and tell it to create a solid. Ta-da! Success, created one solid. And so that just, and honestly, it does not mean really anything. There's no difference between a closed polysurface and a solid, other than that when you use the create solid method, it's kind of a way of double checking that it is actually a solid. Because we're about to use one of the commands that only works on solids, and that is the shell command. So you can just type it in. It's under the solid menu. And then you select faces to remove from your closed polysurface. So we actually want to remove the face that we just made. But we're going to ask for a sort of border along the entire object. So there's a parameter here for thickness. I think 1 actually looks pretty good. I'm assuming that that's 1 grid unit, so I'm going to hit enter and see what it does. Okay, so in this case, I think that parameter was a little bit too high. I thought it was going for the small grid unit, but it looked like it was 1 is actually the large grid unit. So let me go ahead and just do that one more time. So I'm going to shift it down to 0.25. Oops. It's possible that I might be under-caffeinated. Let's see, so by the way, I don't know if I've mentioned this before in Rhino. If you want to go back to the same command you were just using, you can just hit the enter key. That saves you a lot of typing and clicking, since sometimes it does take multiple attempts. So, okay, I'm going to click the surface that I want to get rid of. My thickness parameter is correct in this case. And now you can see I have a nice hollowed out yet solid boat. So I'm hoping that you can all just like immediately visually sort of imagine the difference between this and the boat that we just had, which was sort of this like paper thin, diaphanous, not real boat. This, if we 3D printed it, it would look exactly as it appears on the screen. I mean, depending on how good your 3D printer is. So that was one sort of like big kind of conversion that I wanted to make happen before we start sort of like adding things into the boat, because I wanted to make sure that we went ahead and made it into a solid, because I wanted these edges to work from. So for example, one of the things that I want to put in here is like a bench, because most boats have a place for people to sit, right? So that they can operate the boat. So I have 3 things that I thought of that we could put in the boat, and then 1 thing that we could put on the boat. So the 3 things we could put in the boat that we can work with today and just see how far we get, maybe go into Tuesday. I'd like to make a cooler for beverages. That's important. I'd like to also make a seat for people to sit in. I was thinking that we could make a mast for the center of the boat that maybe looked like a giant unicorn horn. Because. And then I thought we could also maybe put some like wings on the boat so it could like fly around in the sky. So that's kind of like where we're headed. I think the cooler actually might be the bench and the cooler are probably the most straightforward of all of those things. So let's go ahead and get started with those. So I find myself in kind of a situation right now where I've built a thing in Rhino. Hey, congratulations, me and everyone else who has built things in Rhino. You may be asking yourself when you get to some point like this, okay, now what? I have this object. It's positioned around the origin. I guess that's sort of useful. It's certainly useful when you're initially building things, but at this point it's probably used up its usefulness. So there's a couple of strategies here. We could certainly just move it off the origin and then start building additional components here and then drag them into the boat. That's a perfectly reasonable way of going about doing things. The other thing that we can do, which is a method that I sort of am going to prioritize here, is we can start working in layers. And so maybe what I would do here is take this entire boat, so with the entire thing selected, and go into one of the other layers, like layer 1. I'm going to click it and maybe name it Basic Boat. I pretty much, with layer names, I try not to get too clever. If you just name it what it is, that way when you come back like a year later and you're like, I want the basic boat, but I don't want the unicorn horn, you can find it. And so that is just my advice to you. So now that we have this layer sort of all pre-named, we can just hit the control key, control click or right click on a PC, and we can come down here and say change object layer. And what that's going to do is it's going to change whatever you had selected at that time. It's basically going to move it to this layer. And the benefit of having it on this layer is that you can do a couple of things. You can get rid of it entirely, which is highly useful. So just kind of disappear it out of the way. You can also, if you want to keep seeing it, you can also lock it so that when you're object snapping and kind of trying to build things to maybe fit inside of it, that you can reference it, but you don't have to like deal with it really, or mess it up either. So those are all like really kind of just important features that you get with layers. So I think right now I'll keep it visible and keep it locked. And we were talking about making some type of a bench. And one thing I want to make sure real quickly, now that I've made a new layer, is that this little toggle button actually controls where you're drawing. So if I were to just like super quickly draw a shape, this shape that I just drew is drawing on default, which is what I want. If I want to draw on the boat layer, I can do that. I just move this toggle button. So, all right. So a bench seems like a pretty easy thing to make, but things have gotten a little complicated. This boat is not a rectangle. So we're going to have to maybe think about where we really want this bench and also what kind of shape it's going to be and how it's going to fit in with the boat. So probably a good first step would be to just kind of mark out where I want this bench to happen. This is a situation where I probably want to bring back some of my object snaps, like near, point, intersection, just those, I think, for this. And you can see now I can snap to this inner line on the boat, mostly using the near snap method. I also, it looks like I also have the grid snap on, which is good. So at this point, I think I can really kind of eyeball it. You know, nobody's going to hold a measuring tape up to this model. I'm kind of using the perspective view here to draw on it just because it actually seems like more visually accessible. But I can also work here in the top view. And if I hit the Shift key, I can get this to go straight across. And it looks like now I have that intersection. Now, it's asking me to put another point on the polyline. This is actually where I want to quit things. I'm going to start a new polyline, and I'm going to go ahead and make the sort of interior of the bench. So I think I actually want the bench to be maybe even in the center of the boat, because the cooler has to fit back here. So this looks fine. I'm just going to go ahead and put a point down there. And then once again, I want to sort of, here, you know, it's not automatically snapping to ortho, so I can hit the Shift key, and then it snaps to that nice intersection point. And I'm pretty much done with that. Now, the trick here is that if I wanted to create a surface, like a rectangle, that went from here to here, that would be pretty simple. I could use the extrude curve straight method, and then I could extrude that up using the extrude surface method. What makes this a little more challenging is that we have these curved walls. So I think probably what we're going to try is the edge curves method, which is the same method that we used for the other pieces. And you can see that we're kind of asking Rhino a lot, right? We're asking Rhino to basically like trim these curves. So as you can see, it didn't work, which is kind of expected, but I want to let you know why it didn't work. So let me try it again. Basically, when you're using edge curves, if you have intersections like this or areas where the curves are not sort of fully encompassing the thing that you want to make into a surface, it's not going to work. So what we have to do in order to get this to work is to basically come up with these little curves somehow. Now, it just so happens that there are tons of methods in Rhino for extracting curves. And so what we want to do is, we've got this sort of solid object, that's fine. We could probably explode this solid object for a little while. Because it's a solid right now, we're not able to kind of address all the individual curves and parts. So if I explode it, it will, which is this button right here, there's explode, and then the opposite is join right next to it. Hopefully now we can just address this surface individually, right? Which is getting us a little bit closer. Then there's a couple of choices here. We could try actually extracting this curve. We could also try to see maybe just drawing it, if that does anything. Let me take a look at the curve edit tools menu. So there's a lot of functions here that can basically allow you to extract a curve from an object. And so probably we could certainly try this intersection object, Nope, didn't like that. You may have to obviously try the methods a few times. This is probably like a good sort of extract curve method. Tends to sometimes work, although in this case I don't think it's going to give us exactly what we want. I think probably the best thing that we can do in this case is actually just create a new subcurve. So I'm going to create a point like right here, and then another point here. I hear what you're saying, like, oh, Meg, it's not perfect. Hey, don't worry. We're going to just kind of massage it into space here. Now, when you're doing it this way, you're sort of robbing yourself that opportunity for absolute precision that you can get by using some of the curve extraction methods. The only problem is the curve extraction methods are really kind of unpredictable, and they're not really... so you can see right now I'm having like a situation where it's kind of snapping to itself. So this would be a great time for me to disable my object snaps. And then I can kind of have it not stick to itself. I could also turn off the grid snap, because now, instead of sticking to the object, it's sticking to the grid. And so all I really want is to just get it close enough that we're not going to notice it. There we go. That's perfect. That's about as close to perfect as it's going to get in this world. So how do I want to sort of get this curve over to the other side? Probably the most accurate way to do it is to mirror it. So now we could take this curve, this little curve, and mirror. I'm just going to choose like the center of the boat once again. I'm going to turn my object snaps back on because I want to snap here, and then I want to snap maybe somewhere down here. And that looks pretty good to me. So now we have our 4 sort of planar curves. So we can use planar curves to fill this in and make it into a surface. And then we've got one more step until we have a bench. So once again, first we have a hopefully a closed curve right now, closed set of curves. We're going to go into the Planar Curves method and create a surface. Boom, right there. And then we can go into the solid menu and go to Extrude Surface Straight. These are all wonderful methods that we're going to be looking at later in class. It says select surfaces to extrude. We want this one. And it gives us an extrusion direction. So I actually think like in this right viewport, I can sort of eyeball what looks good. It does look like this small box of the grid is 0.25, which makes sense. I usually have my template on a quadrille grid. So this right now is basically saying that looks like about an eighth of an inch, 0.128. I was looking at this number over here. So I'm just going to type in a number that's pretty close to what I want. It's right there. And everything went according to plan, except it looks like it went in the wrong direction. So let me reactivate this function. I literally did not pay attention to the screen for like a split second. Select surfaces to extrude. Yes, please. Extrusion distance. Let's see. Okay, I could have sworn I picked 0.125, but it should be negative 0.125 because I want to go down. That makes sense. Okay, and now you can see it created it to be flush. So that's great. Let's go ahead and take this surface that we just made and dump it into the basic boat layer. So we're doing the change object layer. And you can see now it has the color of the rest of the layer. It looks like sometimes there's some display weirdness with the colors in Rhino. A couple of things that you can do to take care of that. One thing is to just make things invisible and then, put them back on the screen, and it just kind of refreshes them. The other thing that you can do is to just make sure that you don't have the same object on two different layers. So if we make the basic boat layer invisible, you can see that we still have this copy of the object. So we can just get rid of that. And then when we go to the basic boat layer, oh man, that was the original. So let me go back a couple steps. This is actually what I guess I forgot to put the larger thing on the boat layer. So let's take a look, see. Yeah, okay. Small mistake. So yeah, so basically, you might be asking yourself at many points while using Rhino, okay, I just made this thing. Do I need these curves? Do I need this surface? Maybe if the surface is lingering, which I think I deleted it. But basically, when you make stuff in Rhino, you end up with a lot of digital trash. I'll be the first to tell you, it's not trash. I usually save this stuff on a layer in the bottom of my file, and I just will call it like scraps, or I'll call it maybe construction curves is another layer name that I usually come up with for that. And basically, the reason that I do that is because, let's say hypothetically, later on in the design process, and maybe this is kind of what you were asking a little bit with regard to like going back and kind of reforming things. It's possible that later on in the design process, you might realize like, oh man, this boat is supposed to hold 4 people. What am I going to do? And it's like, well, hey, there's still some construction curves here. You can just grab them and move them to the other end of the boat and make yourself another bench. And it would be probably a lot easier than doing it from scratch. So I do tend to kind of save like all of especially the curves and the scraps that I create in the process, because if you do need to do some rebuilding later, then they're available for you. So that being said, it's also, yeah, it's, I guess it's a little bit just being careful. So I'll change object layer on these and get them into the construction curves layer. And then I usually leave that just invisible. Another question that I get from students all the time, when you're working in the layers sort of mode in Rhino, you are not ever going to see this terrible red color like in your rendering. It's just purely like a marking color so that you know what's what and that it's separate from the stuff that is gray or maybe purple. So that's the reason why they choose these terrible colors. If these terrible colors bother you, by all means, choose less terrible colors. How about a nice little baby blue there? Oh, so much more soothing and suitable for my temperament. So yeah, I mean, some people don't care, some people it like drives them crazy. Okay, so we've got basically like still more stuff going on in this boat. We've got a place to sit. I think I'm gonna try to make a cooler, and we're gonna make it just a really basic cooler. So I'm gonna start, of course, we already have played around with boxes, right? Which I'm pretty sure I haven't ever seen a cooler that isn't just like a box. But we can do a tiny bit better than that. You know, our cooler was purchased maybe at some contemporary home improvement store and has some signs of manufacturing, like curves and soft corners maybe. So I think we'll start with a flat shape. I'm going to start with a rounded rectangle. And again, I have the boat up on the screen, so I can kind of use the boat as a visual reference for the size of the cooler. And so I want the cooler to like fill the boat because I want to have as much refreshment as possible, but I also don't want the cooler to be too big. That looks just fine. And so I've kind of marked it off in the top view. When you use the rounded rectangle, the second thing that it asks you to do is to sort of set the parameters for the rounding. So I'm just going to go for like nice plastic object here. And I'm going to just take a second to kind of reorient my stuff. I don't know if you've noticed, but when I work in Rhino, I move around the windows a lot. And partially it's because I just want to see what I'm doing. That's actually 100% why. And so, just taking that extra 30 seconds to sort of figure out where things are, it really transforms your sort of productivity with this tool. So it looks like I went ahead and drew the rectangle at the top, which is fine. Of course, we could move it down to the bottom if we wanted to start there. That was kind of my intent, so let's do that. Now, what am I going to do with this thing? And also, what are some of the qualities of our cooler? Well, so I was thinking that definitely it has to be like a thing that has thickness, right? Like, so we have to do that same treatment that we did to the boat where we kind of hollow it out. We'll definitely do that. It also probably has a lid that hinges up. So we could certainly kind of just address that. And then we can kind of move on and see how it goes from there. So as I said, I have this rounded rectangle, and I could certainly just go ahead and take this, and this is like probably the easiest way you can make form in Rhino, by the way, aside from using the solid primitives, is to go to the solid menu. First of all, start with a planar curve. Go to the solid menu and do extrude planar curve, and then any one of these methods. We'll show you a couple today. So we're going to start with straight. And extrusion, if you're not in engineering and maybe you're not familiar with what extrusion is, think like making pasta, right? Like squeezing something through a tube, that kind of thing. So in this case, we're going to extrude straight, and we're just going to go straight up. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit here, and I might even just snap to the grid to give myself like a nice clean top level. That looks good. And then my next sort of task is to actually extrude planar curve up again for the lid. So there are other ways that I could make a lid. I could put maybe a surface through this and split it. But I think we'll find reasons to do that again soon. So for now, I'm just going to take this rectangle that I already made, the curve, and I'm just going to drag it up to the top. You could drag it now, drag it later, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to repeat that extrude planar curve function. And so there's a nice hardy lid. Now, this is definitely one of those moments where I kind of instantly need to get into layers because I need to basically make a layer for the lid. Why? Because I would like to address the inside of the cooler, and I'm definitely not going to be doing that while that lid is sitting there. So I'm just going to grab this lid and change object layer, and then I should be able to just temporarily turn this off. Here, I want to take the extrusion, which is the sort of shape that we made, and I'm going to use the shell command on this one more time. I think for this, I'm going to give it a much thinner wall thickness, so I'll try for something like maybe like 0.027. That might be too thin, but of course, I have to click the face that I want removed. Forgot to do that. And yeah, that is a very thin-walled cooler. I might have to just, on principle, fix that. Maybe let's try something like 3. Select faces to remove. Nope. That's fine. That's fine. We can definitely work with that. So basically, yeah, at this point we have like a cooler that we can put stuff into. I'm not going to spend too much time on the design of this cooler. One thing that I am going to do is just to kind of make it look a little bit more plasticky manufactured is I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to try to round it off. And so when you do that, you're working strictly with surfaces. Let me get that slide bar out of there. And so also, I think personally, you can see this is just like a really good time for the boat to go bye-bye for a second. Why? Because I have to really get around this thing in order to do this. So I'm going to just do my zoom selected thing, and now I can kind of comfortably move around the object. You can see I've got a poly surface here, and I can come in to this function called fillet surface. And what it does is it basically rounds over surfaces that have sharp corners. And so in this case, you select the first surface to fillet, and then you select another surface, which would be that. Let me bring that back. So it's so it looks like right now it's wanting to select just about every surface except for the one that I want it to select. So one thing I'm going to do is just pre-select that object. That's fine. So you can see it's broken up the rim into a bunch of different surfaces. That's totally typical, and it's something that we can kind of get around. Too far. Hang on just a second. Undo. Just to also like kind of do myself like a tiny favor, I'm going to make a layer for the cooler too. Because right now I don't need it at all to do this, and it's kind of getting in the way. So here I will change the object layer and just get rid of it. And so now when I go to fillet surface, I just want to make sure these parameters are all fine. I'm going to set it to trim, and I'll show you why in just a second. This is not letting me select that top surface. Interesting. Okay, so I just discovered why it's not working, because, well, it's, they say it's bad to, like, say, I was going to say because I'm an idiot, but no, that's not true. I just wasn't completely paying attention. So why would it not work? There's actually, like, a reason that it's not working, and it's not because the computer gods hate me today. There's a really simple reason why it's not working. And it goes back to the sort of our discussion a little bit today about units. So remember how I said that this one grid cell, in this case, one small grid cell was 0.25 inches? Well, so what the software is asking us to do right now is it's asking us to round over by 0.75 inches. Like, how is that going to work, right? Because it's bigger than the object that we are trying to fillet in this case. So human error is what that problem is. So if we choose a much smaller value, we should have some luck. And so here I'm just going to try 0.06, select first surface, and then select our second surface. That is exactly what we're expecting. Oh, thank you, Rhino. And so basically we're just going to kind of go down the line here and get our fillet on. So I, of course, will confess that that is not the first time that has happened to me. Where you're like, what is going on? Why isn't this working? And then you realize it's because you're asking it to do something that's just like not possible. So that's not a terrible lesson, I guess. So let's see, last one. Okay, so yes, and now it works beautifully. So that just sort of gives us our like rounded overlook, and yeah, we have something that looks vaguely like a cooler. And probably, I think it's a good idea in general when you finish things in Rhino, or at least you get them to a state where you probably aren't going to mess with them for a while. Even though they're on their own layer, I would still group them because, when you group them, you get that kind of benefit of really being able to move them around and address them as a group. Okay, so now we got a cooler, we got the bench. Let's do something a little more fun for our last 2 or 3 minutes. Let's work on that unicorn horn, and then on Tuesday, we'll work on wings for this, and we'll also work on sort of like the broader environment, and maybe the environment contains some other items. So for the unicorn horn, I'm going to show you something that we haven't done before, which is I'm just going to make like a quick not to scale shape, and we can scale it down later. And I want the shape to be like an intersection of circles. And so it's something that we haven't really talked about too much yet. But, if I wanted to take these two simple shapes and I wanted to turn them into like a single curve that was just like the outside curve, well, somebody could certainly argue, oh, Meg, you could totally maybe use the curve tool for this and just make it yourself. And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess, but it's kind of hard to draw perfectly circular things with the curve tool, so that's kind of annoying. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use one of these curve edit tools that I was pointing out earlier, where basically you can do a lot at the curve level in Rhino. And the reason why you have so many options to work at the curve level is because that's really like the fundamental architecture of where you're building your surfaces and your polysurfaces from. So here, we're going to use curve Boolean. And that basically comes in here. And it gives you a prompt to click inside the regions to keep. And you can kind of keep any combination of these curves. Hit enter, and then you have your sort of like compound curve. So not the most known or celebrated feature in Rhino, but extremely powerful. I definitely would like to scale this down at this point. And so I'm just going to go to the regular scale function, come up with a base point. That looks fine. That looks fine. And I have to tell you, I am just 100% eyeballing this in relationship to the boat. So I could certainly just, excuse me. I could certainly just drag it over here for a second and kind of say, is that too big still? I don't know. It might be a little too big. Then again, maybe not. I think it'll be fine. We can always scale it down more later. So I have this thing here. Basically, what I want to start by doing is I want to take this curve and turn it into a spike, basically, or like a conical shape that's based on the curve. So to do that, I'm going to use this Extrude Planar Curve method that we already used today, but instead of doing it straight, I'm going to go to a point. And so when you do that, it basically gives you the opportunity to kind of call it up to a point. Now, you can see right now that this is doing something that is just kind of annoying that Rhino is doing. It's sort of snapping everywhere except where I really want it to go, which is like dead center on this object. So you may be asking yourself, how do I fix that, like when it does annoying stuff like that? Oh, I will tell you. Okay, so I'm going to escape out of this, and I'm just going to make a line. And I'm going to start the line where I want the object to start from, and then I'm going to draw like a straight line, which of course Rhino will in fact let you draw a straight line. So basically what I can do now is when I go to that other function, the extrude planar curve to point, I can actually just go straight up to where I want because it's there. And I'm not trying to sort of like touch this point that doesn't exist, right? So sometimes like making yourself little helper objects, even if it's just a single line or anything like that, can be really helpful in Rhino. And so I know I'm like over a little bit, so let's just say, okay, there's our pole, our mast pole, and I think we'll come back on Tuesday for the twisting, in which we turn it into a legitimate unicorn or possibly narwhal spike. Okay, so I will see you on Tuesday. Have some fun playing around with Rhino. It's better than walking around in the snow. Yeah. Have a great weekend, y'all.